Hey writers, welcome to How to Write a Personal Essay That Doesn't Suck. I'm your guide, Dana Shaven, and today we are going to go through the four most important things to know when you sit down to write the story about your life. So before we get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about where I'm coming from. I have been writing my whole life, and I've been publishing for about half of it. When I was 12 years old, my sister gave me a blank book, and she said, write down everything that happens to you because you will not remember it all later. And so I did. And I have about 45 of those blank books now, all filled up. I'm a columnist for the local newspaper. I get to write about the weird and wacky things that happen to me on a monthly basis, like the time I locked myself in the neighbor's chicken coop by accident when it was 5 degrees out and I thought I was going to die. I've also written a whole bunch of articles for a whole bunch of different kinds of magazines, and I am the author of 2 books. So as you can see, writing is super important to me, and I really want to teach you everything I know. So let's go. Okay, y'all. So first of all, let's talk about what a personal essay is. A personal essay is a story about something that happened to you. It can be something great, it can be something horrible, or it can be a story about something you're currently going through or something you went through in the past. You're the star of your story. You get to tell it however you want. There is one primary rule, but it's a big one. Okay, that was a little dramatic, but hopefully it drove my point home that when you sit down to write a personal essay, you know that you can only tell the truth. You can't make stuff up. You can't have people there who weren't there, and you can't say you said things you didn't say. All right, so here's a super important thing to remember along with telling the truth. When you write a story about something that happened to you, you can't just put that story out there and expect that that's enough and that people will find it interesting just because it happened to you. So let's say, for example, remember I told you I got locked in the chicken coop and it was 5 degrees out and I thought I was going to die out there. I thought I was going to freeze to death. Well, in and of itself, you know, it's an okay story, but it would be 1 sentence long. I got locked in a chicken coop when it was 5 degrees out and I thought I was going to die, period. There's nothing really that interesting about a 1 sentence story, right? So what do you have to do? You've got to bring to the story why it mattered. What was the big deal about what happened? So let's talk about this chicken coop story for a second, okay? Let's figure out the so what moment in this story. And you know, your story can have a few different so what moments. It doesn't have to necessarily just have one. Okay, so I was taking care of the chickens for my neighbor who had gone to visit their family in another state for Christmas. We were having unusually cold weather. And on my way out of the house to walk over to the neighbor's house, I said goodbye to my husband, who was in the garage with very loud music on. He told me to be careful. It went in one ear and out the other because after all, what could possibly be all that dangerous about taking care of a flock of chickens, right? It's kind of a no-brainer. Like they're not gonna go into attack mode or anything. So as I walked over to the neighbor's house though, I could not believe how cold it was. I had on a coat and a ski cap, but I was shivering. The news had said it was 5 degrees out. When I got to the neighbor's house, I stepped into the coop to change the frozen water out, and that's when I heard the door lock behind me. So I've written all of this in my story. So I didn't panic at first, and I wrote that in my story too. I didn't panic at first, but I was shivering harder, and I was getting colder by the minute. The chickens were kind of alarmed by my presence in their coop. You know, they don't really mind people all that much, but they don't want you to hang around for very long. And they wanted to eat and drink, and there I was, you know, my big self in their enclosure. Well, so I realized there was a wire cord on the door that if I tugged on it, it would unlock the door from the outside. So my neighbor had thought through, that if somebody got locked in, that's how they could get themselves out. You just pull on that wire cord. And so I tugged on it and it broke. So there I was, alone, locked in the chicken coop in 5-degree weather with nobody around, and no way out. And the one thing that was supposed to save me, which was this cord, had broken. Remember my husband in the garage with the very loud music on? I knew that if I called him, he wouldn't be able to hear me. I called him anyway. I called him like 7 times. And of course, he was not able to hear me. Finally, I called the neighbors who own the chickens. And they called some other neighbors who walked over and finally let me out after about 5 or 10 minutes. So that was the story. Obviously, you knew I was going to survive because I'm telling you about it. But do you care about my plight yet? About, what I went through in the chicken coop? Why should you care yet, just given the information that I've just given you? Okay, well, for one thing, maybe it makes you think about a time something similar happened to you. You found yourself in a bind, or you got yourself in a situation that scared you and you didn't know how to get out of it. So maybe now you care about my plight being caught in the chicken coop because you can relate to what I'm talking about. In other words, maybe my story is now kind of universal, like it can apply to other people. You don't have to be locked in a chicken coop to be able to relate to what I was going through. Later in my story, I talked about being afraid I might actually die in the coop because I was getting colder and colder. I couldn't claw myself out of the enclosure. And then at some point along the way, I got really, really mad at my husband for being in the garage and not being able to hear his phone. And so maybe something like that happened to you one time, something that was your fault, but you got really mad at someone else anyway, like I did. So maybe that's a way that you are relating to my story now. Or maybe you just think the story is funny. I mean, obviously I didn't die. So it's okay to laugh at my predicament, right? And that's okay too, because if you're laughing, that means you are engaging with my story. So, and my story is now entertaining you. And that's a big part of what stories need to do. So you can see the point of our stories is not just to tell what happened, but to get across why it mattered. So in this case, I was scared. I was in possible danger. I blamed an innocent person for it, my husband. And it's very likely that you, the person reading my story, have had a similar situation where you felt frightened or trapped. But in the end, of course, a simple phone call to another neighbor ended my plight. The moral of this story becomes a number of things depending on what you personally take from it. And what you take from it might be different from what somebody else takes from it. So it can be how some people give up too easily in situations. It can be how quickly a good situation can turn bad. Or it can be how easy it is to blame other people for our predicaments. All of that, any one of those things you could take away from this story, and that would be the why it matters part. Okay. Let's look at one more example, and this is completely made up, but I want to make sure you kind of have this in your bones. Let's say, for example, you go on a trip to Disney World with your family, and you all get sick. You all end up in a hotel room puking and having diarrhea. You can't go on any of the rides, and that ends up being your entire vacation. I mean, in and of itself, that's kind of a funny story, right? I mean, it's gross, but gross is fun. Gross is interesting. It probably would be a really fun story to write. But the real magic of writing your story, of course, happens when you explore what happened to you as a result of what you went through. So, okay, so for example, maybe, in the midst of all this puking and having, and pooping, you helped take care of your mom who was also sick, in that hotel at Disney World. Or maybe you helped take care of your siblings. You stepped up to the plate and you became more of an adult in that situation. And your mom, as a result, your mom and dad realized that they could trust you in a whole bunch of ways that they didn't know you were trustworthy yet. And so you grew in their eyes as well. You matured. And when you got home from vacation, they let you do things that maybe they hadn't let you do before. In that moment, in that hotel room, you were changed. And that is what the reader is reading for, not all the puking and pooping, although that's entertaining. What the reader is reading for is how you were changed because of what you went through, like how it affected you. Okay, so do you have that in your bones? I hope you have that in your bones. If you don't, I invite you to back up and listen to all of that again. But something tells me that you are not going to do that. So I think you understand now that what I'm saying is you can't just write your story. You have to write about how you were changed, the why your story matters part. Alrighty, so we have already established two very important things. First of all, you have to tell the truth when you write an essay, a personal essay. You can't make stuff up. And second of all, you have to tell the reader why your story matters, why you're telling the story in the first place, how you grew from it, how it changed you. That's super important. So now I want to talk to you about how to actually start your story. And the way we start a story is with a fantastic hook. So an opening line or opening couple of lines that draws the reader in and makes them go, wow, what's going to happen next? So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some good hooks and a couple of examples of some not so good hooks so that you can kind of get a feel for what we're looking for. Here are two hooks for the same story, and you tell me which one is more compelling, like which hook makes you actually want to read the story. Hook number one. Hi, my name is Sarah, and I'm 15 years old, and I live in Iowa. I'm going to tell you about something that happened to me a few years ago that was really important and that I'll never forget. And this is hook number two. Same story, different opening. The car spun around and around on the ice, and the other car we hit also spun around and around. And for what seemed like an eternity, our two cars were spinning around each other, waiting for the moment of impact. It was going to be bad. I knew it was going to be bad, but I could not have imagined exactly how bad it was going to be. So which of those two hooks makes you want to read further in the story? I'm guessing it was the second one that drops you right into the car accident, right? So here are a few other first lines from books. You can decide for yourself if you think the hooks are good. I think they're pretty darn good. The first one is from a book you might have heard of called Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And it goes like this. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. So that's the first line of that book, and that kind of sets the scene already. You get the idea that this is a couple for whom it's going to be very important to be normal and to look perfectly normal. And if you've read any of the other Potter books, you know that Harry Potter's going to step into that household and completely mess things up with his magic, or completely change things around. Upset the status quo, let's say. That's a pretty good hook. The second hook comes from J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye, a book you might have read. See what you think about this for an opening line. If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born and what my lousy childhood was like and how my parents were occupied and all that before they had me and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you really want to know the truth. So that's the opening line from Catcher in the Rye. That, of course, is Holden Caulfield, the narrator, speaking. And I think that sets the tone nicely for what kind of character we're going to be dealing with in that book. One of my favorite first lines comes from a book called The Uglies by a guy named Scott Westerfeld, and it goes like this. The early summer sky was the color of cat vomit. Now, I don't know. I just feel like you read that and you already are interested in how this guy is going to, how he's going to tell his story. So think about these and think about whatever it is you're writing about. Think about how you can hook your audience right off the bat. What you can say in your first line or your first couple of lines that will make them desperate to keep reading. And with that, we conclude part 1 of how to write a personal essay that doesn't suck. Congratulations. You have learned in this part that you must tell the truth in your personal essay. You can't make stuff up. You can't have people in there who weren't there. And you can't have them say things that they didn't actually say. You have learned that you have to, as well as telling the story, you have to tell why the story mattered, how you were changed as a result of what you went through or as a result of what happened. And number 3, you also learned how to start your story, which is with a great hook, something that's going to grab your reader right from the get-go and make them say to themselves, ooh, I need to read on because I want to see where this story is going. So congratulations, you know all of this, you've got it in your bones. I feel confident, and see you in part 2.